Hello, and welcome to the episode Life is for the Birds. Tony Ducks, Tony's Ducks, Jaguars, Wiretaps, and Rainstorms. In the Season 5 episode Rat Pack, Tony meets with Jack Masserone about some construction projects, most notably the Museum of Science and Trucking, cleverly written on Jack's hat as MOST, which also has a mic in the top. As we quickly learn, Masserone is turned by the feds and trying to get incriminating evidence on Tony. Two key pieces to pull from here is that A, Jack Masserone drives a Jaguar, and B, it's raining. This comes into play later when we see the local cop pull up on the two feds monitoring the meet. Once again, through these two subtle clues, we can dive into Mafia history. Back in the early 1980s, the FBI and local police were stumped by how to bust the mob. They could arrest all the lower level guys they wanted, but when it came to the bosses, they had nothing. They never beat people up, actually pulled the trigger, collected payoffs, or any other illicit activity that could be used to arrest them and put them in jail. This was until an enterprising and clever law professor at Notre Dame created the RICO Law, Racketeering Influenced Corrupt Organizations Act. The gist of it is that by charging the higher-ups with conspiracy, you could get the bosses. Even though they didn't pull the trigger, they conspired to and gave the order, making them just as legally culpable as those who actually did the shooting. The law sat on the books for a bit until none other than Rudy Giuliani figured out how to use it. This is where our story begins. The FBI and the cops still needed solid evidence to prosecute the bosses as they were. So they began a campaign of bugging and tapping in hopes of the bosses and top lieutenants revealing incriminating evidence about the mob's inner workings. Where this connects more specifically back to our Sopranos episode is through the story of Tony Ducks.
Not those fucking ducks again.
No, not Tony's Ducks, Tony Ducks. Real name Anthony Corallo. Now his nickname didn't have anything to do with actual ducks. He earned it during his hard-scrabble days coming up in Harlem. The duck in his name came from his ability to duck warrants and subpoenas, keeping himself out of legal trouble.
Have any occupation?
I refuse to answer on the grounds of made intent.
Are you a known racketeer?
I refuse to answer on the grounds of made intent to criminate me.
You have a lawyer?
Yes, sir.
Recruited by Tommy Lucchese himself, Corallo spent his early days learning the rackets, as well as, despite a mafia ban on it, selling heroin. The hypocrisy here is amazing. You'll see in a second. He was also involved in garbage, construction, and a gravel distribution business, which he owned and obtained contracts for via sweetheart deals. He made captain in his early 30s and was in fact so well respected in the family that while he was in jail on a racketeering charge, the position of boss was saved for him until he was released. Tommy Lucchese had nominated him to the position before his death. The FBI and state police had observed that Tony Ducks would get picked up most days by a Salvatore Avellino, who drove, you guessed it, a Jag. He would leave his home in Long Island and travel to Tony Ducks' house, where he would then drive into the city and around the 5 boroughs, doing business and discussing mafia matters in the car. The plan was simple: bug the car. The execution, however, was much harder. The car was parked inside a garage at night, and Salvatore rarely left it long enough in the street for an agent to break in and plant the bug. After weeks of exhaustive tailing, they came upon an opportunity. Avellino, big in the garbage business, had been invited to a ball for Long Island carters. Of course, he would have to go. Now, the FBI had prepped and trained for this scenario by borrowing a Jag of the exact same type and doing timed raids on breaking in and installing the bug. On the night of the big garbage man's ball, it rained. The rain was a fortuitous break for the agents. While Avellino was inside, his 2 bodyguards who were watching the car got sick of standing in the rain and went for cover. They left the car unattended. With that, in the pouring rain, the agents broke in and attached the bug, making sure to wipe off any raindrops that landed on the seat during the operation. It immediately paid dividends, and they began to hear a treasure trove of info. There were all kinds of things discussed, but the major stuff included payoffs from the construction business and various union beefs involved in the commission's infamous Concrete Club. All the concrete in the city was run through mob-controlled contractors and companies, making them a fortune.
One job. Well, it seems that he says that Cody is making a beef and complaining about that because that was theirs.
Let him go complain to Fat Tony.
He says this was theirs.
This is the carpenter. Let him go complain to Fat Tony. Listen to me, please.
I'm listening to you.
He's got to go complain to Fat Tony. What the fuck has he got to do with carpenters?
Another discussion was about drugs and the mafia's rules on such activities. Corallo was adamant that those involved should be killed, which, as I mentioned before, is hilarious considering that he himself had been arrested for drug dealing.
You cannot be in a narcotic business and put it on your fucking stomach. And then part of the time is you gotta be exposed to it. You gotta go out in the street. You got to sell it. You can't be in the drug business without going in the fucking street and sell this cocksucking shit. We should kill them. We should have some examples.
It must also be noted that he accepted money from Gaspipe Casso and Vicamuso, both of who sold drugs together and passed the money up the chain to Corallo. Still, the bosses, once they reached their lofty status, felt that they were unwilling to risk long jail sentences that came along with drugs. Two other interesting points were that of Joe Bonano and his recent 60 Minutes interview, and a book that he wrote about his life in the mafia. While Bonano did some clever sidestepping, he did basically admit his involvement in the mob.
About a commission. He was admitting that there was a commission. He did. And like was saying, on the TV, he didn't call it. He just says, I'm a father of a family.
What was the real cardinal sin for Corallo was that he even admitted that the mafia existed at all, a huge no-no. One of my favorite conversations had in the car was relating to the other bosses having their sons made into the mob. They discussed how Andy Russo, from the Colombo family, had made his son. They pontificated on whether they should have their own sons made into the mafia. They decided that they should not, but it left them to philosophize on whether the life was really any good at all.
If the life was good enough for you, and the life was good enough for you, pointed there, and for me, if we really believe in it, why wouldn't we want our son? If I were a doctor, I would be saying to my son, since he's a little kid, you're going to be a doctor. If I was a lawyer, I would be looking for my son to be a lawyer. So they must feel that if this life was good enough for me, I want it for my son also. Otherwise, we're really saying that this fucking life is no fucking good for the birds, right?
When all was said and done, the Taps buried Corallo and the other defendants in the commission case, all of them receiving what were effectively life sentences. Tony Ducks was packed off to prison where he died in the year 2000. Now, all this might be a coincidence, but I just can't help but feel that the Jaguar driven by Massarone and the Rainstorm included in the episode about an attempt to bug Tony, and the Tony Ducks, Tony's Ducks connection are a nod to this real-life incident.
Mr. Corallo, what do you think about all this? What do you think the verdict's going to be?
Don't know the first thing about it.
You know,